Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and this is the video that was meant to be done and go up last weekend, right? So this is the Oscar and Lucinda Readalong video for chapters 33 through 57. So we're a week off pace, or I'm a week off pace, off schedule, and the reason for that is so roughly 2 weeks ago. I re-aggravated a shoulder injury. My left shoulder has had bursitis in it for, I don't know, probably 9 years now, I would say. I've been in physical therapy for it on two different occasions. But the last time was, I don't know, probably 3 years ago, something like this. And I just aggravated it again about 2 weeks ago. And then a few days after aggravating it, we got a really bad snowstorm here. And as those of you who live in places with a lot of snow will know, a lot of shoveling and manhandling your snowblower, particularly if you have the Cadillac of snowblowers, which we do, can be difficult on your body, and so it aggravated that shoulder even more. Did that snowstorm, and so this was, I don't know, like early to mid last week. Not this last week that we just finished with, but the previous week. And then on that Friday night, I woke up at 1:30 in the morning and my shoulder was just in excruciating pain, so much so that I basically didn't sleep for the rest of the night. And then Saturday was, I was in so much pain from it that Kelly was sure I'd have to go to the doctor on Monday, but I couldn't read because I couldn't hold the book. I really couldn't do much of anything without just blinding pain. And then as a result of not sleeping on Friday night, I've just been behind on sleep ever since then. And so reading or doing anything kind of productive has been a challenge, especially after a day of work, right, Monday through Friday. So anyway, so that's why I'm behind. But the shoulder's feeling a lot better, and and I'm feeling kind of back in the saddle, as it were, with the read-along. So we're going to just jump right in to chapters 33 through 57. All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about with this section of the book, and we see it as well in the first, quarter of the book, but one of the things that I love and admire so much about Oscar and Lucinda, I talked last time in the last video about the two main characters and how real they feel to me, right? How they kind of just jump off the page. But it isn't just the two protagonists in this novel who feel real. It's all of the minor characters as well. People like Ian Wardley Fish and Theophilus Hopkins, Hugh Stratton, Betty Stratton, Dennis Hassett, Percy Smith, Melody Clutterbuck. These are all characters of whom Carrie has given us such clear portraiture that we feel like we can see or imagine their lives outside this story, right? So when they walk off the page, as it were, they're walking into lives that we can imagine, because Carrie has given us enough about them, enough about their personalities, their tics, their hang-ups, the degrees to which they feel compassion or entitlement, etc., etc. It's just a lovely thing to behold, how the characters who populate this book really do make it a world, right? We think of world building primarily in works of science fiction and fantasy, but this is such a feat of world building, and so much of it has to do with the people on the page. They have such tiny roles in the novel, but Carrie's big heart as a writer makes it clear that he believes that all characters deserve his time, deserve his best effort, deserve as much of his sense of invention as he can spare. In particular, I love Ian Wardley Fish. Dennis Hassett's a really great character as well. I love that, that he kind of, how he gets his parlor ready for who he assumes is going to be a man. And laying out his kind of examples, his samples of glass, et cetera, and just how Carey writes about his parlor, like in describing the room, he's describing the character, which is a pretty cool thing. I don't think many writers kind of go there, or even understand that that's a brilliant way to describe what is going on inside a character, is to give us their environment, right? How it's curated. What are the forces kind of affecting change on that environment, and it's a beautiful way to paint a character, the inner life of a character. So anyway, that's one of the things that I just really love in this novel that I wanted to mention today. Another thing, right, is I got my notes down here, the acuity of insight, as I put it, into characters existing within their social contexts. And there's a couple of examples I wanted to give you here that I just find to be really brilliant. So in the chapter after Whitsunday, we have Dennis Hassett and Lucinda having a conversation, right, about whether or not he'll be able to or would be willing to help her purchase her glass factory. I am jealous because the drop is yours, not mine, because more than that, you can enter the glassworks through the main door, just as you may. But I cannot, don't you see? They will not treat me with anything but the greatest condescension. And besides, I would be made into the creature they imagined I was. Do you understand me? She held him with her eyes. She was a child. She was not a child. Her eyes were clear and steady, while her voice amplified the slightest trembling in her lower lip. He was held by the strength and touched by the frailty. No, he said, I do not understand you. By the way they looked at me, by their perception of me, they would make me into the creature they perceived. I would feel myself becoming a lesser thing. It is the power of men. But I am a man. No, she said, too impatient to let him develop his argument. Of men in a group, men in their certainty, men on a street corner or in a hall. It is like a voodoo. Do you know a voodoo? So this is a male author writing a female character, understanding what men as a kind of collective are capable of, the ways in which they can impose their will on a woman, right, and make her feel discomfited, make her feel threatened, make her feel doubt in herself. And I think it's really remarkable. It's a really remarkable insight. I mean, there's a lot of talk, right, about to what extent men are good at writing women, to what extent women are good at writing men, et cetera, making the characters fleshed out rather than stereotypes. But yeah, Carey's imagining of Lucinda is so rich and so complicated and feels so true. I just find it a really beautiful thing. The other example of this that I wanted to mention, let's see here, 203. I don't even remember what it was now. Yeah, so this is Lucinda again. Lucinda Laplastre put her knife and fork together on her plate, the fork with its tines upwards. She knew her hair was a fright. She could feel it slipping from its clips. Her cheeks were burning, but she forced herself to look slowly around the table, to take in every face before she spoke. She had taught herself this trick in Sydney. It was a sea anchor thrown out to slow her before the gale of her emotions, and although she did not actually feel it herself, it gave her an appearance of almost queenly dignity. And again, that is just writing of such sensitivity to how people try to wrest control of a situation, right? When they feel off balance or they feel uncertain, or they feel put upon or intimidated or frightened. The way in which they can kind of establish their composure and get the upper hand on some level. It's just wonderful. It's wonderful to read prose like that, that just kind of needles deeply into the characters, into their minds, their hearts, their insecurities. Hey, so there's one thing that I want to talk about here that has to do with an article actually that I read online. But before that, I just wanted to just read just a few examples because my favorite thing about this book is the beauty of its prose. Okay, and so I just wanted to read you guys just a few examples of that on 208. Again, just down to the level of the sentence itself. So they're up on deck. Some of the characters are up on deck, and they're looking at the phosphorescence in the sea. Lucinda could see in the luminescent sea the most splendid globes of fire wheeling and careening like things from a prophecy. So just break that down, right? The first clause, Lucinda could see. And then the second clause, in the luminescent sea. So that we have Lucinda and luminescent, right? Two words beginning with the same sound, okay? And then sea, I see you, right? And sea, right? The ocean. Lucinda could see in the luminescent sea the most splendid globes of fire wheeling and careening, right? Wheeling and careening both have that double E sound in them, like things from a prophecy. And we return to that word, right? We return to the sea in the last syllable of that last word, prophecy. Lucinda could see in the luminescent sea the most splendid globes of fire wheeling and careening like things from a prophecy. It's a beautiful sentence, man. It's a really breathtaking sentence. And then, so basically, I'm not gonna read this whole chapter. The chapter in the book, chapter 48, which is called "Who Can Open the Doors of His Face." This is primarily a chapter. So Oscar's getting ready to leave, right? And Hugh Stratton and Theophilus Hopkins and Ian Worthy Fish, a number of people have come to kind of see him off on this ship. And Oscar has a paralyzing phobia of the water, right, of the ocean. He's going to make this ocean voyage to Australia. And this chapter primarily concerns his father, Theophilus, and his own fear for his son, the degree to which he feels bereft, from the rift between himself and his son. And I just think it's one of the most beautiful chapters in all of literature. I mean, the writing front to back is just absolutely extraordinary. So I just want to read a few passages. It felt faint ever since. He was like a man who arrives at Osaka when he had been expecting Edinburgh. Everything was odd, distant, trembling. His son was beautiful to him. His heart sang the song of Solomon. He had his mother's fine, heart-shaped face, the face he had cupped in his hands at the wonderful moment when his seed spurted. A bundle of myrrh is my well-beloved unto me. He shall lie all night between my breasts. He had his mother's gorgeous hair and milk skin, his mother's animations and enthusiasm, her wide eyes, and, most of all, her hope. This was not a dark face that would fall prey to pride of jealousy. It was a better face by far. He offered the gift. It was all he had. Right, and so, and the gift, right, he's giving Oscar soldering implements, right? And what's beautiful about that, actually, too, is like I said, there's a divide between Theophilus and Oscar. Since Oscar left his father's home and parish to be schooled in the Anglican Church, and they don't really speak anymore. And so the fact that he's giving him these soldering implements, tools that have one purpose, right, and that is to join things together, to bring things, to make things whole again, is just a lovely, lovely thing. But then he's also giving him his call, right, which I'm a little bit fuzzy on what a call is, but it's something, and not all babies are born with them, but it's something like I want to say it's a kind of film or something, right, from a kind of tissue from the inside of the placenta that is sometimes expelled with the baby, and if you read online, right, like later in the book, right, it talks about this as well. Legend has it that a baby who is born with what's called a caul, right, this tissue from inside the womb, that the caul will protect the baby from drowning. And so that's what he's giving to Oscar in that scene. And then on the very next page, he saw his son tremble before the face of Leviathan. Rain stood on the edges of his hair as on a Holworth blossom. Right? That's just a beautiful sentence. That's a beautiful image. And then on the next page here, this is just one of my favorite passages from the whole book. He drew his handkerchief from his pocket and unleashed the fragrance of Mrs. Williams's ironing board. He blew his nose, not looking at his son. He was remembering a child and wife in a Devon lane, myrtles, perfumed hedges, luscious red mud, which caked so thickly on their boots that their feet became heavy and padded as creatures in a dream. So that's some of the really beautiful stuff that I wanted to mention, some of the really beautiful prose that I wanted to mention. The last thing that I want to talk about in this video, so a few weeks back, about a month and a half ago, I read an article on Literary Hub online, on Facebook's Literary Hub page, and the article is called "Winning the Game You Didn't Even Want to Play," on Sally Rooney and the literature of the pose. Stephen March considers contemporary fiction's slow abandonment of literary voice. And I was intrigued by this, right? So I haven't read Sally Rooney. I have not read Sally Rooney. I know people, my wife upstairs, who hates Sally Rooney, has read one book of hers and will not read anymore. I have friends who adore Sally Rooney. My friend Jasmine just adores Sally Rooney. But I was intrigued by this idea of fiction's slow abandonment of literary voice. Like, what does that mean? What is the difference? The literature of the pose, the literature of the voice, right? So I started reading, and I'm going to read the beginning of this article to you. It's a really, really long article. I've read the whole thing multiple times. I find it really fascinating, really brilliant, really disturbing. But I wanted to read this to you, and then just talk a little bit about Carrie, kind of in relation to what this writer is banging on about. Sally Rooney is unhappy. Sally Rooney has everything, and Sally Rooney is unhappy. Sally Rooney is unhappy because Sally Rooney has everything. If literary careers are like games, and they are, then Sally Rooney has won. The massive best-selling debut, the even more massive, even more best-selling follow-up, the successful television adaptation, the profiles, the prizes. Quote, "I write to you from Paris, having just arrived here from London, where I had to go and pick up an award. They never tire of giving me awards, do they? It's a shame I've tired so quickly of receiving them," she writes in her new book, Beautiful World, Where Are You? No question mark. Her own celebrity for Sally Rooney is evidence of insanity, both in the people who envy it and in the society that values it. Quote, "Okay, it's been a small experience in its own way, and it will all blow over in a few months or years, and no one will even remember me, thank God," she writes. "And then that's it. I'm finished. And the next flashy 25-year-old with an impending psychological collapse comes along." Her new novel is, in a sense, the collapse that has been impending. Sally Rooney has jumped through the world's hoops and found, at the end, the emptiness of all hoops. But Beautiful World, Where Are You? Is more than a young, healthy, successful, rich, famous woman in love complaining about youth, health, success, wealth, fame, and love. It arrives at a particular moment in literary history, a point of transition, or properly speaking, two simultaneous transitions. The literature of the voice is dying. The literature of the pose has arrived. The basis of literary style has shifted. When I was in university, and friends with mainly fellow literature obsessives, or let's be honest, geeks, we would play a game where someone would read the first sentence on page 149 of any given book, and the rest of us would have to guess who wrote it. Examples. The nephew came back from peeing inside the house, and after touching his lips for silence, pointed his thumb to say that what they were looking for was round back. The next example. And God, look out! The Portobello Road, the whole trench scuffed and frayed, falling apart and full of rats. The third example. He was a young man, and he refused, and having recognized the harness maker for a white man, spoke to him in a way that made the harness maker ashamed, so that he invited the young man to come to his dwelling a few miles distant on the road. The idea at the time, this was the 1990s, was that any well-read person should be able to figure out who was writing from any given sentence they wrote. In this case, Toni Morrison's Beloved, Martin Amos's London Fields, and Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. Some writers, like Thomas Pynchon, nobody would ever pick too easy. It is next to impossible to play the page 149 game with the 21st century novel, but let's try anyway. First example. 4 hours later, his alarm clock woke him. Second example. The show was a brutal success, one critic called it. The third example. But I'm okay, actually. I just need to get cleaned up. There's not a word out of place. Each sentence passes quality assurance. The above sentences are certified, not wrong. The writing of the pose is first and foremost about being correct, both in terms of style and content. Its foremost goal is not to make any mistakes. Its foremost gesture is erasure, and its foremost subject is social anxiety and self-presentation. One never loses oneself in the writing. Rather, one admires, at a slight remove, the precision of the undertaking. Those particular examples are from Ben Lerner's The Topeka School, Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and Sally Rooney's Normal People, respectively. All right, so I have not read any of those three books, but I find the comparison of the first three examples and the second three examples really telling, I suppose. And and when the writer of that article talks about those three examples from contemporary novels, right, the Ben Lerner, Ottessa Moshfegh, and Sally Rooney novels, he says not a word is out of place, right? Everything is pristine and neat and considered, blah blah blah. And so when I think about Peter Carey's fiction, so let's go to page 149 of Oscar and Lucinda and read the first complete sentence on that page. All right. Oscar, being permanently in London, could no longer expect to be billeted at Ladbroke Square, which was, in any case, closed down again, with the servants left starved on half pay and no scraps of fat to sell off at the back door while they waited for Lady Wardley Fish to decide she was, once again, bored with the country. All right, so that's Peter Carey, right? The first sentence on page 149. So here's the point that I want to make. There is such craft in Peter Carey's fiction, okay? And now what he's saying about this contemporary fiction from people like Sally Rooney and Ben Lerner is that there is craft as well, okay? But it's about, like I said, it's about self-presentation, right? It's about showing people how kind of pared down and neat and anonymous, really, the writing can be, right? When you read any of those three sentences, they feel like they feel like sentences that are kind of prose versions of what Rupi Kaur's poetry is, right? They feel like they could have been written by anyone. Whereas if you take the prose by people like Cormac McCarthy or Marilyn Robinson or Toni Morrison or Peter Carey, the sentences don't at all feel like they could have been written by just anyone. They feel like they could only have been written by that writer. And I think that's the distinction that he's making between the fiction that had been, the standard bearer for literature in the latter half of the 20th century, and the fiction that we're seeing now, right? So Carey's writing, like I said, Carey's writing has such craft, right? And I would argue that these young writers, that their writing is kind of obsessed with craft as well. But the thing about Carey's fiction is that his craft is informed by exuberance, right? One gets the sense, right, in my notes here that I wrote down this morning, one gets the sense from the dense brocade of his prose to the breathless, wondrous conceit of the story itself to the unorthodox structure of the novel that Carey relishes risk, that he believes fiction is an art form at its best when it goes for broke, when it understands the value in not having a net. We're not seeing, we don't seem to be seeing fiction, much fiction like that anymore, right? Again, right, those three lines from those novels that he shared, they feel anonymous. They feel they just feel so careful, and not careful in a good way, right? Not kind of carefully constructed, as it were, but obsessed with not making a mistake. And Oscar and Lucinda feels like a novel, where Carey throws everything in but the kitchen sink, and knowing full well that he might make mistakes, right? That there might be loose ends, or this might not make sense, or this might be illogical, or et cetera, et cetera. You get the sense that he has thrown himself into the writing of this book, and I love that sense of abandon in the books that I read. That's one of the things that I just really. It's why I love Charles Dickens so much, right? I love writers who, like I said here in my notes, that go for broke, right? Who put it all out there, and some of it might not work, but yeah, they're willing to give us everything they have. They're willing to exhaust their energies and their imaginations and their generosity in the writing, and trust that we will soak it in, that we'll appreciate it, that we will recognize not only ourselves and our worlds in it, but what our worlds could be and what we could be. Yeah, I mean, this novel is an example, a wonderful example of that literature of the voice that the writer of that article is talking about, and it seems to be going the way of the dodo, unfortunately. I mean, who knows what the fiction landscape is going to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now. Maybe we'll turn back, maybe we'll pivot back to literature of the voice. We're blessed by the fact that Peter Carey's still alive, that he's still writing great novels. You know, he's won the Booker Prize twice. He almost won the Booker Prize a third time, and it would have made him the only person to have ever done that. When the year that Howard Jacobson won the Booker for the Finkler question, Carey was shortlisted for his novel Parrot and Olivier in America, and it came out right after the award was given to Howard Jacobson, that in the final judging, Andrew Motion, the poet Andrew Motion, was the chair of the judges that year. In the final judging, it had come down to the Finkler question and Parrot and Olivier in America, and I think Andrew Motion was the deciding vote, and he's a huge fan of Carey, and who knows why he went with the Finkler question, but yeah, Carey was this close to being the only novelist to have ever won the Booker Prize 3 times, which is, oh man, that's saying an awful lot. So anyway, I will leave a link to the article, this Literature of the Pose versus Literature of the Voice article from Literary Hub in the description box below. It's a hell of a read. There are loads of people who have been really, really pissed off by it. The novelist Janet Fitch, I think his name is Janet Fitch, who wrote White Oleander. Anyway, on her Facebook page, she shared that article and just raised an uproar about it, big old stink about it. And in the comments below, all these writers that she's friends with and critics that she's friends with, it's all a bunch of people just patting each other on the back, and congratulating each other for being super smart and putting this article in its place or whatever. But I think the article's brilliant. I would say as much on Janet Fitch's page, but apparently that post of hers is not... One isn't allowed to comment on it unless one is a friend of hers. And I wouldn't be able to comment on it right now anyway, because I'm in Facebook jail again for the third time in the last year and a half. And that expires this afternoon. But anyhow, yeah, it's an article that has raised a lot of hackles. But then, of course, there are people like myself who think it's just seems to be right on the money. So anyway, enough ranting, I suppose. Let me know what you guys are thinking of the book in the comments below. I haven't responded to all of the comments on my first video yet, but I will try to get to the rest of those this weekend. But thanks again, yeah, for joining me and reading along with me, and I hope you're loving the book as much as I do. And if not, I hope you're still getting something out of it. So anyway, I will talk to you guys again next weekend. Adios.